They called her America's Empress of Elegance. But Marjorie Merriweather Post didn't inherit a throne, she built it. Born into a breakfast empire, she turned cereal into fortune and fortune into influence. Her name adorned palaces, her jewels rivaled royalty, and her parties made presidents bow. But beneath the diamonds and the diplomatic smiles was something no one expected: loneliness. Marjorie Merriweather Post was the richest woman in America, a titan of luxury, the hostess who redefined what it meant to live grandly. From Washington to Palm Beach, from the icy waters of the Potomac to the golden halls of Mar-a-Lago, her presence commanded the powerful. She dined with kings, negotiated with generals, and moved through the 20th century as if history itself had been her guest. Yet behind the shimmering facade lay a truth money couldn't disguise. 4 marriages, each ending in heartbreak. A lifetime spent searching for partnership in a world that only saw her wealth. And a heart that longed for something the world's richest woman could never buy: sincerity. Her life was a contradiction, part fairy tale, part fortress. She collected art like memories, built estates like monuments, and filled her solitude with beauty. She called it gracious living, but maybe it was just her way of keeping the silence at bay. Everyone saw the glamour. Few understood the woman who built it. Because Marjorie Merriweather Post wasn't just living a luxurious life, she was hiding inside it. Before the mansions, before the diamonds, before the name Mar-a-Lago meant royalty and power, there was a girl in Battle Creek, Michigan, watching her father turn flour into fortune. Marjorie Merriweather Post was born on the 15th of March, 1887, into a family that would revolutionize the American breakfast table. Her father, C.W. Post, suffered from chronic illness and poverty until he discovered that simple, nutritious foods could heal the body and sell to the masses. From a makeshift kitchen, he began producing Postum, a caffeine-free coffee substitute, followed by the first ready-to-eat cereals. Within years, Post Cereal Company became a household name, and Marjorie, his only child, became heir to an empire. But her father's success came with intensity. He was brilliant, perfectionist, and often unpredictable. The young Marjorie grew up under his discipline, learning not only how to live with wealth, but how to manage it. When he died suddenly in 1914, a suicide driven by chronic pain and mental strain, she was just 27. And in an era when women were expected to marry rich, Marjorie did something no one anticipated. She took control. Under her leadership, Post Cereal grew into a corporate empire. She merged with General Foods, acquiring brands like Jell-O, Birdseye, and Maxwell House, creating one of the first great American conglomerates. It was bold, visionary, and unheard of for a woman. But Marjorie wasn't interested in being polite. She wanted power, and she knew exactly how to use it. With business secured, she turned her eyes toward art, architecture, and diplomacy. She collected European treasures, tapestries, Fabergé eggs, imperial jewels, not as trophies but as pieces of civilization she wanted to preserve. She filled her homes with history, curating the lives of kings and queens within her walls. And she built palaces worthy of them. Her estate on Long Island, Hillwood, and later Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach were not homes, they were statements. Designed to impress diplomats and dazzle aristocrats, they became playgrounds for the rich and stages for politics. Presidents dined there, foreign dignitaries danced under chandeliers imported from Russia, and socialites whispered that Marjorie Post lived like European royalty. But even in her grandeur, she never forgot the lessons of Battle Creek. She ran her homes like corporations, efficient, precise, and impeccably managed. Every table setting, every bouquet, every guest list was deliberate. She called it the art of gracious living. To the public, she was the perfect hostess, serene, cultured, untouchable. But those who knew her best saw something else: a woman driven by discipline, haunted by her father's ghost, and quietly searching for connection in a world that treated her like an institution instead of a person. She built her life on perfection. But perfection, as she would learn, is the most fragile empire of all. By the 1922, Marjorie Merriweather Post was more than an heiress, she was an institution. The newspapers called her the richest woman in America, but wealth was never her goal. She wanted refinement, permanence, legacy. And she would build all three with her own hands and her own heartbreak. Her life unfolded like an opera of glamour and scandal, scored by the rhythm of the jazz age. Her first marriage, to investment banker Edward Close, gave her 2 daughters, Adelaide and Eleanor, but little happiness. Close preferred Wall Street to companionship, and Marjorie, disciplined and ambitious, outgrew him. Their divorce in 1919 scandalized society, but she didn't hesitate. Within months, she remarried to a rising financier named Edward Ned Hutton. It was with Hutton that Marjorie's empire truly began to expand. Together, they built General Foods Corporation, turning her father's cereal company into one of the first industrial giants in America. She wasn't a silent partner. She attended board meetings, made strategic decisions, and negotiated acquisitions. Behind the charm of her pearls and tea sets was a woman who could calculate profit margins as deftly as any man in the room. Hutton, however, was dazzled by power and by other women. His affair with a Broadway chorus girl humiliated Marjorie in the tabloids. Their marriage collapsed in 1935, leaving her wounded but unbroken. Her revenge wasn't loud, it was architectural. She built Mar-a-Lago. Designed as a 115-room Mediterranean palace stretching from the ocean to the intracoastal waterway in Palm Beach, it was her masterpiece, a symbol of her endurance. Marjorie personally oversaw every detail. Hand-painted Spanish tiles, Venetian ceilings, Austrian crystal. She filled it with 16th-century tapestries and Louis XV furniture. It wasn't just a home, it was a statement. I will not be forgotten. Guests described entering Mar-a-Lago as stepping into another world, one where elegance was law and Marjorie its serene queen. Presidents dined under her chandeliers. Dukes and ambassadors sought her invitation. And yet, amid the glitter, she remained lonely. Her third marriage, to Joseph E. Davies, a diplomat and lawyer, brought her into the orbit of global politics. When he was appointed U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union in 1937, Marjorie followed him to Moscow, a world away from the champagne and candlelight of Palm Beach. While Davies wrote reports and courted Stalin's circle, she collected art specifically, the treasures of the fallen Russian aristocracy. Fabergé eggs, gilded icons, jeweled clocks, artifacts of a vanished empire. She saw herself in them, beautiful, preserved, displaced. When they returned to America, her collection filled her Washington estate, Hillwood, which she later donated as a museum. She called it a gift to the nation. But perhaps it was something more personal, a monument to the life she'd curated and the loneliness it hid. Her fourth marriage, to Herbert May, a Pittsburgh businessman, seemed promising but quickly soured. He cheated. She divorced him in 1958 and swore never to marry again. She didn't need another man. She had something rarer, her own empire. In her later years, she devoted herself to philanthropy hospitals, the arts, the Boy Scouts, the Red Cross. She gave quietly, strategically, almost as if she were rewriting her legacy one donation at a time. To the world, she remained the grand hostess, perfectly dressed, perfectly poised, perfectly alone. She had everything money could buy. And yet, she spent her life searching for something it couldn't love, that wasn't transactional, admiration that wasn't calculated, peace that wasn't purchased. She once wrote in her diary, "I have built a beautiful life, but I sometimes wonder, was it for me or for them?" The question would follow her until her final days. In the shimmering reflection of her ballroom mirrors, Marjorie Merriweather Post appeared untouchable, a living symbol of wealth, refinement, and power. But as the decades passed, those reflections began to betray her. Behind every chandelier, every jewel, every portrait she commissioned to immortalize her poise, there was a quiet, unspoken truth. She had built her world to keep loneliness out, and it had followed her anyway. By the 1,950 Marjorie's name was legend. Her estates Hillwood in Washington, D.C., Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, and Camp Topridge in the Adirondacks were more than homes, they were kingdoms. Each one had its own staff, gardens, and private orchestras. She would arrive in her private rail car, the Postobon, wearing couture gowns imported from Paris, ready to host senators, diplomats, even presidents. She moved through history as though it were her own stage play. But no performance lasts forever. As her children grew and the marriages faded into memory, her lavish dinners became quieter. The gossip faded, the headlines softened. What remained was the woman beneath the pearls, older now, reflective, still regal, but no longer surrounded by applause. Marjorie had built everything her father could have dreamed of and more, but she couldn't build permanence. Her art, her homes, her fortune, they were all her armor. But even the richest armor can't keep time from finding the cracks. She became obsessed with preservation, not just of art, but of herself. She would personally oversee every restoration, every placement of every relic in Hillwood. She curated not only her collection, but her memory, as if afraid that one day She too would be auctioned off, piece by piece, like the empires she'd once admired. Her staff adored her. They spoke of her grace, her precision, her generosity, but they also noticed how she often ate dinner alone, her table set for 12, her seat always the same, the head of an empire with no heirs to her heart. In public, she smiled for photographs, held charity galas, and accepted honors. In private, she wrote long letters about faith, about time, about love that never lasted. She confessed to one friend, "Money buys everything, but the one thing I always wanted to be truly known." The world saw a queen. She saw a collection of moments, beautiful, fragile, impossible to hold. By the time she turned 70, the woman who once commanded the world's attention had started giving it all away. She donated her estates, her art, her jewelry, not because she no longer wanted them, but because she finally understood what they had cost her. Each treasure had come with a price: isolation, sacrifice, illusion, and in that realization came something rare: peace. The headlines never told the full story of Marjorie Merriweather Post. They chronicled her marriages, her jewels, her palaces, but they missed the human truth that glittered quietly beneath it all, that no amount of grandeur can protect the heart from its own hunger. When asked once if she ever felt lonely, she smiled and said, "Not when I'm surrounded by beauty." But maybe that was the loneliest answer of all. From this channel's perspective, Marjorie Merriweather Post was not just a symbol of wealth, she was the embodiment of America's most seductive illusion, that beauty, power, and control can protect you from pain. Her life reads like a novel written in silk and solitude, a woman who had everything yet kept reaching for something she could never quite touch. She wasn't born into tragedy. She built her own kind of it quietly, elegantly, and with impeccable taste. To the world, she was perfection. The hostess who could outshine royalty, the collector who saved fragments of lost civilizations, the businesswoman who defied her time. But behind every perfect dinner and diamond was a truth she never escaped. Loneliness is the tax of power. Marjorie's story forces us to question the American dream she seemed to embody. She turned her father's cereal company into one of the world's largest empires. Yet what did it cost her? 4 marriages, each more fragile than the last. A life where affection was often confused with admiration. A love measured not in devotion, but in access. Her power was real, but it came at a price few could afford. In a century that demanded women be ornamental, she made herself unbreakable. But the irony is that unbreakable things cannot bend, and eventually they shatter. She lived in the world of men, but mastered it better than they did. She used her charm like diplomacy, her money like strategy, her estates like embassies of elegance. Presidents and ambassadors walked through her doors, not realizing they were stepping into the court of a woman who had quietly rewritten the rules of influence. And yet, for all her control, she remained, at her core, that same girl from Battle Creek, eager to prove herself, terrified of being forgotten. Every chandelier she hung, every painting she bought, every gala she hosted was a plea to time itself. Remember me. Her life reveals a deeper truth about fame and wealth, one that echoes through every generation of icons. That grandeur and emptiness often live in the same house. That success can become a mask so heavy it suffocates the face beneath it. Marjorie Merriweather Post was both the architect and the prisoner of her world. She built beauty to keep loneliness out, and in doing so, built a kingdom she could never leave. She called it gracious living. But what she really created was a masterpiece of controlled solitude, where every flower bloomed for others to admire, and every smile hid the silence behind the walls. Her life wasn't a tragedy of loss. It was a tragedy of abundance, the kind where you have everything except enough. In the twilight of her life, Marjorie Merriweather Post would sit beside the window of Hillwood, her Washington estate, gazing out over the manicured gardens that seemed to stretch into eternity. The world she built, the chandeliers, the tapestries, the Fabergé eggs surrounded her like a museum of memory. Every object had a story. Every story had her fingerprints on it. When she died in 1973, the newspapers called her the Queen of American aristocracy. But the truth was simpler, softer, and far more human. She was a woman who built beauty to protect herself from loss, and in doing so, gave the world something enduring. Today, Hillwood stands as her final gift, a museum of elegance, discipline, and longing. Visitors still walk through her halls, marveling at the splendor she left behind, the glittering silver, the imperial porcelain, the portraits of a woman who looked serene, but carried the ache of a life lived at the highest altitude of solitude. Her legacy isn't in her wealth. It's in her mastery of grace, that rare ability to turn survival into art. She once said, "I was taught to believe that with privilege comes responsibility, and with beauty, the duty to preserve it." She did both, flawlessly, relentlessly, quietly, and yet, one can't help but wonder what she would have traded one chandelier, one estate, one priceless gem for a moment of ordinary happiness. Marjorie Merriweather Post lived as if time itself were her guest, and perhaps it was. Because even now, decades later, her presence lingers not in her possessions, but in the perfection she pursued. The Queen of Cereal, the Empress of Elegance, the woman who turned a business empire into a palace of grace. She never escaped her own grandeur, but maybe she didn't want to. Some lived to be remembered. She lived to never be forgotten. Some stories fade when the lights go out. Hers still glitters in the dark. Some stories were never meant to be known. But now, you know,